this is something else I want to talk about. I see a lot of people that come in and they're kind of like one lift wonders. Like they're really good at one lift. And I'm not knocking it. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you want to be a competitive power lifter in today's powerlifting landscape, it's not enough. You won't win. You're just not going to win.
So how would you define an advanced lifter, like explicitly? Like what are the criteria?
People will look at this differently. I think actually, if you look on, I know USPA has something like this. I'm not sure if USAPL does. They generally have classifications, and there is a classification, I think, specifically for the advanced lifter by total and by single lift and by weight lifted in each event. Creating a classification system like that would be good. I think that that's also something that you would have to update, however, relatively frequently relative to the population of lifter that you have.
So would you define it as like a certain number of standard deviations above average?
You could look at it that way, yeah. It would probably be there would probably be a statistical analysis that you would use to determine what threshold of people have hit, certain benchmark or certain objective number, and we're defining that as advanced. And then there is like elite, and then there is novice, intermediate, beginner, stuff like that. And we would probably want to base something like that off of like a bell curve, and then we would just have to see what's reasonable for defining advanced and what we want advanced to look like in our sport. I know that can be like really super arbitrarily determined, but I think we should also definitely include like an analysis of like performances, numbers. What are people actually doing? Let's not like just go off of perceptions, because perceptions can be skewed. A lot of people can watch top tier level, top level lifters, and they'll say, "Oh, well, a 400-pound bench is weak." I don't. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's like that's very, very good. There's not a lot of like men in the world, relative to the whole population that can just like bench press over 400 pounds naturally. Like that's a very big, feat of strength. But they're so used to seeing elite level lifters bench 400 pounds that in their mind they're like, oh well, 400 pounds really isn't anything. I should do more than that or get to more than that. It's like it's not how it works. So that's why I think data and statistics are important, because if we're going to determine these benchmarks, we need to use actual numbers.
So if I demanded your biased perception, what would you guess advanced totals would be for like a couple different weight classes if you just had to throw something out?
For tested powerlifting, right? Or just overall?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
tested.
So if we're assuming tested powerlifting, let's look at that popular cluster of weight classes, right? Let's look at that 75, 110. A lot of men are going to be a lot more likely to fall in one of those weight classes than they are 125, 140, 140 plus, right? Because we know the population, most men are in that weight range. So if you're looking at 75 an advanced total, let me actually get my calculator real quick, because there's a way that I often do this. And Atwood is an extreme outlier in the 75 weight class, right? He put up, I think, well over 1,800 at Raw Nationals in 2021. So we'll just say it was circa 1830, 1835, I think. I would say for 75, you're probably looking at roughly like a 1,500 total for advanced, maybe even high 1,400s.
That's a 161 weight class when you convert it, right?
165. Yeah, you're looking at a bit over 1,400 for like an advanced level lifter. Probably like mid to high 1,400s actually is what I would say. For 82 and a half, just because the record right now is not that much higher, but I think it will get pushed eventually. It just hasn't yet. I would say you're looking at about 1,500. And then for 90, you're probably looking at about like 1,570, 1,580. For 100, again, I was like an outlier in that weight class and no one's broken that record yet. 2094. We're probably looking at about 1675 to 1700. So you're probably in that low 1700s range or high 1600s range, starting when you get into that 220 threshold, because the mass is starting to really make a difference there. And then for 242, I would say about 1700. And those are just rough numbers that I'm just kind of calculating and playing with off of the top of my head based off of circa what the record for the weight class is. However, you have to be careful with even doing that type of calculation because, in some weight classes, the record is so much higher than a lot of the performances than the others, and how much of an outlier that top performance is may also skew that. If we were to remove, let's say, like an extreme outlier and we had like a way to calculate that, well, there is, but and you calculated that and you removed that extreme outlier and you just kind of just looked at the rest of the population, then your advanced lifter might look a little bit different than a lot of people expect. I know you asked for my bias perception. But again, like it's hard for me to look at it in that way because I just know that if I don't go off of numbers, then it's just locker room talk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you gave me what I was asking for.
And that's me still even incorporating like my mindset into a biased view. But I mean, this is powerlifting, it's pretty objective, it's numbers based. The guy who picks up the heavier things wins, right? So from the competitive aspect, our sport is also interesting in that you get 3 lifts and you get 3 attempts on each lift. And those lifts, the highest successful of each lift, will comprise of a total, and that total determines who is the winner of the meet. Now, in order to be a competitive power lifter, this is something else I want to talk about. I see a lot of people that come in and they're kind of like one lift wonders, like they're really good at one lift. And I'm not knocking it, there's nothing wrong with it. But if you want to be a competitive power lifter in today's powerlifting landscape, it's not enough. You won't win. You're just not going to win. Like there's going to be somebody better than you. There's just too much talent coming into it now, and I think it's only going to grow. That just is what it is. If you are a one lift wonder, unless you're literally deadlifting over 1,000 pounds raw with no straps, no supportive suit, and on a stiff barbell, and to competition and judging standards, like you're just not going to pull it off, right? What I'm trying to say here, what the message is to try to focus on all 3 lifts. Focus on globally improving all of the lifts in the total as much as you can. Single lift records or, having a record in one lift. And I'm like, that's cool. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, hey, like if that's what you like, go for it. But to me, that doesn't make you a competitive power lifter. It just makes you a really good deadlifter. It makes you a really good bencher. And now I will say though, like, just a caveat. If you like are a bench only dude and you're benching like a ton of freaking weight, like 600, 700 pounds, yeah, that's pretty awesome. Not a lot of people can do that, right? I'm more impressed by that than like a 900 or 800 deadlift because that's just like to me that's mind-boggling. Caveat aside, if you want to be a competitive powerlifter, don't focus on one lift. Focus on all 3 of them. Focus on globally improving your total and giving yourself the best opportunity and chances to win. Now, it does pay for a competitive powerlifter to be good at the deadlift, right? Because the deadlift, if you're looking at how a meet is set up, deadlift is the last lift, the last event of the competition. And if you have a big deadlift, you have the advantage of selecting, your deadlift attempts based on your other competitors, especially if you can deadlift more than them, to try to pull for the win or to steal a second or third place spot, right? And that's the beauty of deadlifts. So it does pay to be good at them. You need to be able to have a total too. So you need to be able to bench press something decent to keep you in the running. And you need to be able to squat too. And if you can deadlift a lot of weight and you have strong enough hips, legs, back, like you should be able to squat too. And if you can't squat, but you can deadlift a lot, that just tells me generally that their deadlift is a lot more leverage based than it is like. And as we talked about in a previous video, leverages are, yes, the number one, thing that determines sort of if a power lifter will be really good. But number 2, right below that is muscle mass, right? So developing the muscle mass through the strength training is important in order to globally improve all 3 of the lifts. So all these things are working together in tandem, right? And they're separate concepts, but they all work together in tandem. They're all tied together in some way.
What do you think the common mistakes are that people are making that's holding them back from getting into advanced territory?
That's an interesting question. I think I wouldn't even say common mistakes. I would say one that a lot of people aren't actually physically adept or capable, at least not in the short term, not within like 3 to 5 years of training. But if they train for a long period of time and they stick with it, they kind of hit that ceiling and they just happen to be good enough, then, cool. Just realistically speaking, not everyone's going to be able to be capable of doing that. Everyone doesn't have the genetic potential to do that. That's how it is in most of any sport. Not everyone is capable of being in the NBA. Not everyone is capable of playing in the NFL. Not everyone has the structural body strength stamina to do certain sports, and that's okay. That's just sort of the natural order of things. There's going to be outliers. There's going to be the people that are kind of leagues above many others, and then there's going to be everyone else. That's generally how averages and stuff like that play out. There are a lot of people that are capable of achieving a certain strength level, but as the strength standards and competitive powerlifting continue to rise, I think it's just going to become harder and harder over time to sort of reach that level. But again, it's hard to say because you see this happen in other sports too. First person breaks, what was it, like 4-minute mile? And then a bunch of dudes start doing it, right? But for the people that are capable of being an advanced level powerlifter and are not yet, one factor might just be time. Maybe they haven't done it long enough yet, or they haven't had enough practice yet, and they haven't built enough muscle mass yet, but they have the capacity and the potential to, they just haven't gotten to it yet. To those people, I say just keep going. keep going, keep working, see how far you can take all this, especially if you're enjoying it and having a good time, but keep doing it. And that's one of the biggest pieces of advice in general that I can give is just perseverance, man. It's really just sticking with it and doing it for the longest period of time. It's not a sexy answer. It's not like an aha moment. Like I'm not trying to get anybody, I'm just saying like just literally just do it for a long period of time. That's literally the best piece of advice I can give you. If you want to see if you're capable of being an advanced level competitive powerlifter, you need to just buckle down and do it for a while.
How long is a while?
I would say a few years.
Like 2, 3?
In 3 years, you would have a pretty good semblance of maybe not of like your like ceiling or potential, but you might have a good semblance, where you stand at that point. You'll begin to form an idea of where you're at.
Yeah. Take that same idea and kind of turn it around a little bit. It's if you aren't 2 years in, you don't really know what you're capable of, because I think a lot of times, like especially when people are just starting to lift weights, and let's say they're just super small, like they're 130 pounds because they've never lifted weights before, they've never been super athletic, that there's no reason why their muscles would have grown already, but as soon as they start lifting the body, you realize you've got like freak genetics,
You just take
and the body just takes off. But like you really don't know until you step into the gym what you have available. And you can pick out leverages from the very beginning, and you kind of got to get technique. Well, you could do like actual limb proportion links to figure it out and run some math. But in general, once your technique gets good, then you can really look at it and see if it's going to work for you or not. But I think a lot of guys get discouraged because they like think of themselves as like the skinny guy and that archetype because they're 130 pounds. Just try and see, give it a year or two, and you might be surprised that you might find yourself at 180 lean after 2 years and you put on 50 pounds of muscle because your body loves to add muscle.
Yeah. And your leverages change too as you gain that kind
That's
of.
a good point. That's a good point.
You might have amazing leverages at 180 that you didn't have at 130. Like it'd definitely be easier to bench press. So yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, and that's why the aspect of just time is so important. Just sticking with it, because like you said, you don't know. It could be, very light and start out and just not really know. You gain a tremendous amount of muscle, and you happen to be, genetic lottery jackpot winner, and you just start putting up crazy lifts, and then you deadlift 700 pounds at 17, and you start. You just don't know until you get into it,
Yep. How much did you weigh when you first started lifting?
I was really young, so I was like really light. I was probably like 100, probably around 130, 120.
What age did you start? It was like 14, wasn't it?
13.
So that's eighth grade. So 130 at eighth grade. How tall were you at that time? Do you remember?
120? No, I don't remember. I was probably like 120 actually.
So let everyone know, Ashton was not always jacked.
Yeah. It was crazy because I was actually really muscular, but I was just really light. I had no fat on me. And then at the end of high school, the heaviest I had gotten before I graduated was like 200 or just a little bit over that. But I was like 190 something when I graduated.
Yeah, I remember seeing pictures of you at 15, 16, and you were just super jacked. Like you gained a lot of muscle really fast.
Yeah, that 15, 16-year-old range was when I started to get really strong. And bingo, that's about 2-3 years after I started.
Yeah.
Right around that time, that's when it just took off in strength and got really strong.
So were you like the 3 gallons of milk in the fridge kind of guy, or how were you eating around that time?
I actually wasn't really eating a whole lot. We didn't have I mean, I just, I would try to get a job where I would like work like in the food industry, and then I would just eat at work a lot of the times.
Where'd you work?
I mean, I worked at Chipotle for a while, which worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
Even for me. Also worked at a Subway before. I was a sandwich artist. Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah. So let's take like an example. Let's say there's like a guy in the 198 weight class. He's been lifting for a couple years. He's getting pretty good at it. But let's say his total's like, I don't know, 1,400. So how would you get them to advanced level? And would like at each like 100-pound increment from like 13 to 1,400, 1,400 to 1,500, would you do different things, or would it be the same thing to get that person all the way up?
It would probably be the same thing for a while. Just finding what works for them and using that again for a while. Once they do start to hit, sort of a higher like threshold or level of strength, and we'll know this for the person, and this probably varies a bit by the person, where it starts to not work or they aren't necessarily able to keep up with like the training, the injury risk looks like it seems to be increasing, or there's like more aches and pains and stuff like that, and then the body's just sort of telling him like, hey, this is too much. Then there obviously needs to be a significant change to, or maybe not even a significant change, but there just needs to be a change or reshuffling of things. And that's totally normal. I mean, the way that I train now is not the way that I trained when I was 18 years old. It wouldn't work. I lift too much weight. It wouldn't work.
What's different?
Yeah, well, I used to lift one a lot more intensely then, and two, I used to do a lot more volume, even with like low bar and stuff. Like now, if I do a lot of volume with low bar, it absolutely kills me, especially when I have to like deadlift conventional, like heavy. Like there are things I've noticed because relative to my max, if I'm doing like, all right, well, let's calculate.
It's calculated.
Okay, let's say so in the gym I've hit an 827 squat before, right? I mean, and it felt like I had more too, but I'm not sure if that's where I'm at right now. But let's just use that number, 827. Let's say I want to do 5 sets of 5 at 80%, right? That's a pretty challenging workout. That's 661 for 5 sets of 5. So relative to the max, yeah, 661. But actually loading 661 onto the bar and then doing it for 5 sets of 5 is something completely different. Versus if your max is 500 and you're doing 375, 365 for 5 sets of 5, or even 400 for 5 sets of 5. Even it's so much different. One is a lot more difficult than the other. That's all I'll say. And that's because I've been there.
So what would it look like now instead of 5 sets of 5, for example? Would it be more like 2 or 3 sets of 5, or would it be different altogether?
Hardly ever fives. Even like with low bar, I almost never go above 3 reps anymore. I usually, when I train a little more volume, like sets of 5, or even 8 or 7 or whatever, I'll do high bar. And for me, I've always liked high bar more. It's always like, for me, I've always noticed more like physique changes and muscle building with high bar anyway. That one, I just seem to respond well to high bar. So that's what I like to do. But with low bar, obviously I can lift a little more weight on it. With low bar, I just like to get enough skill practice in, especially with heavier weight, or at least a certain threshold of heavier weight. And that tends to help me perform. So I'll do like a top, single, double, or triple, and then I'll do like 2 or 3 sets of like 2 or 3 reps at like a certain percentage, like drop, like 20% drop, right? So the weight is not like crazy heavy, but it's like, it's a little bit of weight. You get a little bit of, of a stimulus, and you get really good skill practice. Mm-hmm. You get good at the movement. You get better and better at it over time. That's kind of how I like approach low bar now. It's more sustainable, and it even still affects the acute fatigue. Even still affects my deadlift in the same session. Like it's a little bit harder to deadlift when I do those extra sets of low bar. I've noticed.
Yeah. So for that 198 lifter who's working up towards, let's say 1600, would you have them do would you have them go ahead and switch to like the 3 rep sets, more that style of what you do now, or would you have them stay higher rep sets in general for the main compounds?
Yeah, for the main compounds, I mean, I wouldn't say like super high rep sets. I mean, it depends on a few things, right? It depends on like the proximity to the meat. It depends on, how they respond to that too, because some people I think just don't really respond to that kind of stuff as well. And you still want the overall volume to be there, but depending on the person, you may need to like split it up in like different ways. And I'm not like a coach or anything, but this is just like how I would approach it. Like if we notice a significant like drop off, or their like technique or whatever diminishes extremely after like a certain rep range, then I'm probably going to avoid that rep range. And I would prescribe more sets with a slightly lower rep range instead of less sets with a higher rep range. You see what I mean? So like you're still getting in the volume, it's just in a different way. It's in a more digestible format. The skill practice is there. The rep to rep, it looks better. Ideally, you're reducing injury risk, and some other things. So that's kind of one thing. But generally speaking, if it's a 198 lifter and he's only been doing it a couple of years, chances are there's still going to be a pretty good amount of volume, because they're still very much in a growing phase, building sort of that foundation that foundation just in the sense of like having, more muscle mass, denser bones, just being stronger in general. So there probably would still be a component where there's definitely a good amount of volume on the big 3, especially squat and bench. Deadlift, we just kind of have to see how they deadlift and what their deadlift style is.
Yeah. It does seem like with some people, they really don't need much volume for deadlift, whereas others, it seems like they need a lot more.
Yeah. Honestly, like I think I'm one of those people where like if I deadlift once every 2, if it's conventional, right? If I deadlift once every 2 weeks, like I'll be fine.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I don't think my strength would not drop, dude. Like because I've done it before and it works, right? But doing it a little bit more frequently than that, doing it once a week or even twice a week, depending. But the second day is just a lot lighter. It just allows you to get more work in over time. And if you're able to lift more weight and do more, in a shorter time span, ideally, and as long as you don't get hurt, ideally you should be able to get stronger from that versus not. But I think for some people there probably are diminishing returns with that. And for me, it's always been about kind of finding that good sweet spot. I think once a week is really good. I mean, I can do it more often than once a week, but if I want to be my absolute strongest and lift the most weight possible, then once a week, is pretty good.
With something like that, let's say like one of your variations is like stiff leg deadlift. Would you try and put that on the same day in that instance, or would you not mind putting it on the other side of the week, maybe after squats or something like that?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't mind putting it on the other side of the week. So as long as like that weight stays within a certain threshold of like your like max, like you want to be reasonable, right? You don't want to do stiff legs with like 750. Like there's no really
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like there's no purpose, in doing that. But if you're like doing it to build muscle, to get in more movement, to practice your hinge and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, if you're a strong guy and you deadlift over 800 pounds, maybe you're doing it with like, 485, 540, even 600, but just getting that practice in, I think that additional practice and doing it out of weight and a load that's manageable and tolerable and you can handle and it doesn't like destroy your primary day of lifting, then yeah, then it's totally fine.
And like let's go like year one, year two, year three, etc. Like how many peaking cycles can you run in each year before it's like, all right, bro, you need to chill out?
For like the average person, or at least let's say the average gym goer or even power lifter, I would say
Yeah, let's say they're pursuing powerlifting. They want to become advanced.
I'd say go for it like twice a year.
So about half the year spent building
Once,
muscle, half the year spent peaking.
yeah, like once every 6 months, like if you're doing the meet, spend like two or 3 months like peaking for it, but you're still doing volume during the peak. And then the other 6 months of the year where you're not actively peaking, just pound fucking volume and get bigger and stronger.
What if someone said, you know what, I'm not going to compete for 2 years. I'm just going to do hypertrophy for 2 years. Would you be like, yeah, it's a good idea? Or would you be like, nah, man, you should peak? Assuming they're playing the long game.
Yeah. I mean, that's not entirely a bad thing. I would still encourage them to at least try it once a year. I think that lifting at the top thresholds of your strength is a skill in and of itself. And if you never practice it, then I don't necessarily see that as being helpful either. You don't have to go to the other complete extreme end and never peak. I would say it's still healthy to have it in there a couple of times a year just to do it, to get stronger and to see the fruits of, your labor. It's very hard for people to go 2 years not peak, not lift any, super heavy, maximal weights, especially if they're dead set on being a competitive power lifter and just be cool that whole time. 2 years is a long time, man, of training. There's nothing wrong with, having some fun and, maybe even doing like a little mock meet, right? Let me do a mock meet. Let me see what my numbers look like right now. Or just do like a local meet. Let me see what my numbers look like. I'll go in. I kind of have like a plan. Let's see how it goes, right? You've peaked for it and everything. But yeah, I would encourage somebody to, because competing is also a skill, right? That's why I like to do at least a couple meets a year. Because for me, you go too long without competing, you jump right back into it. I mean, you could totally be fine and do super well, but also it's like you could also feel kind of rusty and you haven't really listened to commands and done all this stuff in like a long time. So, it could throw you off a little bit. So for me, I like to keep the machine well oiled and I like to do it every once in a while. Even if it's a small local meet, I'll still do something. Do it for fun. I don't have to put up like an RP 9 or 10 total. It can be something lighter, but I just get in the practice. And that's kind of how I feel about peaking even for younger lifters. Do it once in a while. Don't do it once a month. Don't do it once. Don't do it 6 times a year. Do it like twice a year or so and spend most of the year focusing on building. Yeah, I think that works just fine.
What are the common training mistakes that you see a lot of guys make that's holding them back?
Yeah, training mistakes. I see when a person is especially invested, like in a type of lift, like if they're really invested in deadlift, for instance, I see a lot of guys go really hard in the paint in that lift really early. In my opinion, it's to their detriment. I mean, for a while, you might have those newbie gains and you might just take off and just progress so much. But I think there comes a point where, you just kind of hit a hard wall, especially when you're younger too, because when you're getting stronger and in strength training, I think your body needs time to structurally just sort of like adapt to the weights that you're adding to your lifts. And that should be I think to minimize risk injury and to maximize long-term gains, I think it needs to be a little bit more of a gradual process than a very sudden process. And I think a lot of kids try to rush that. They try to expedite everything. I mean, everybody likes everything faster now, right? They try to expedite
Yeah.
it. It's no different with lifting and powerlifting. They try to expedite it. But I'm like, hey man, if you're putting those weights on your back, it might not be smart to expedite that. But
How would you recommend they throttle that back?
I think a good way to do that is having someone. It could be a coach, but it could be other things too, or a program, some sort of structure, right? That's what I'm getting at. They need structure. They need a plan, structure and a plan, something that they can follow. On this day, I'm going to lift like at this threshold or this, either at this RP threshold or this percentage or this whatever. And I think beginner lifters should use percentages more than RPE anyway, just so they can kind of learn what their body like kind of like responds to. And then after a little while of that, then move into RPE. Because people respond to percentages a little bit differently, but there's like kind of an average, right? Yeah, I think that having that structure there and having a plan there and kind of going off of, certain percentages or certain whatever, having numbers a little bit more concrete and solidified, like towards the beginning, I think is helpful. It doesn't need to be so ironclad where if the person walks in and they feel crummy that they can't drop it, 15 pounds, like that's unreasonable, right? Like you should be able to you should have wiggle room for that.
Mm.
Or if you feel really, really good, and that's where you have to be careful because people will, let me just test my max. Don't do it. Just add 10 pounds for the day, and if you hit like a big volume PR or whatever, and it's like 5 or 10 pounds, but you do it, you crush it and smoke it, and it's easy, then it's a big win, and you'll probably recover a lot better from that than hitting a max. That max has the potential to disrupt all of it, the whole system. So don't try to disrupt the whole system, and it takes a little bit of impulse control, but stick to your plan, stick to the schedule, listen to your coach if you have one, and just really, I think the structure is really one of the most important things there to prevent that from happening, is having structure, a semblance of structure in some way.
What do you think are some common nutrition mistakes that lifters make?
It goes beyond nutrition. I think what the issue is a lot of times is a lot of younger lifters, and I think you'll agree with me on this. They restrict themselves to a lower weight class. Dude, if you're like 16 years old and you're just starting to lift and you're trying to stay in the 148 weight class, why? Like why? Like, dude, you're gonna grow up. You're probably, if you're lifting weights all throughout your adolescence into your manhood, when you become a man, you're probably not going to weigh 148 pounds anymore. It's very rare that there's a man that weighs 148 pounds that just lifts weights all the time religiously. It's rare. You're going to probably weigh 160 to 200, right? On average, most average guys that are active and work out. You could even bump that up to like 220, but I would say 200 is probably more accurate for like tested natural like dudes lifters.
Mm-hmm.
I think what it is they restrict themselves and they try to keep themselves in a lower weight class, and they don't eat enough. They stunt their growth, man. They stunt their gains. They slow it down, and they end up gaining weight anyway and trying to force themselves to stay in a weight class in a weight class that they won't even win. So it's like, what's the point? If you're not going to be like a top 5 competitor for a weight class, or you don't even have a shot, like you don't even have the sight of, winning that title in the next like 2 years, then why force yourself to stay in that weight class? Why not just go up and give yourself the best fighting chance to put up the most weight possible? That might actually rank you higher than forcing yourself in a lower weight class, performing poorly, getting injured, and then trying to stay at that lower body weight, but you gain more weight anyway, because you're injured and you're sedentary, and then you start lifting again and you feel good, and then you cut weight and then you get hurt again, and then you don't perform well. It's it's a whole cycle. It's like, good job, man. You just wasted 2 years. For me, man, I'm just like, hey, man, like, especially for these younger guys, like if you're young, don't be afraid to gain a little bit of weight. Yeah, you might gain a little bit of fat, but you're going to gain a lot of muscle too, and you're going to get stronger. Just don't be afraid to grow. You can worry about cutting some fat, trimming up, later. And when you are competitive, if you make it to that point where you're competitive for a weight class, then you can start worrying about, oh, well, do I need a water cut or do this or that for like a weight class, right? But until you are at that point, unless it's for health reasons, right, that you want to stay at a certain body weight, I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah. Gain the muscle.
Yep.